Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Vortex, which is episode 11 of season 1 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode Vortex. So Vortex is the episode where a criminal from the Gamma Quadrant named Croden comes on board the station, and Quark uses him to steal an item for him in exchange for passage to the Gamma Quadrant. However, the theft goes awry when the two Myrmidons that he's trying to steal from fire at him, and he's forced to fire back and kills one of them. Now, they were apparently twins, and so the surviving twin Myrmidon vows death on Croden and does everything he can to try to kill him. Meanwhile, Odo holds this prisoner prisoner in his cell. And while he's in the cell, he reveals to Odo a key that can shapeshift, and he claims to know who Odo's people are and asks him to take him to him. Odo sees this as simply a ploy to escape, but still can see that there's some validity that Croden does know where his people are and who they are, as he refers to them as changelings. Now, eventually, Croden is to be sent back to his home world, and Odo is the one who takes him there, but the Myrmidon chase him down and threaten to destroy the runabout, so they have to hide in the nebula where Croden claimed the changelings were. But when they get there, Odo finds that he was in fact lying, and that it was just happened to be a key. And there are some legends and myths of changelings once existing on his homeworld, but he never actually met one or knows where they are. He did in fact want to get to his daughter, whom was escaping persecution because the authorities on his homeworld were trying to kill his whole family. So he had his daughter in a stasis chamber and went to rescue her, and Odo does in fact feel bad for him, and they manage to outwit the Myrmidons and destroy their ship. And then Odo lets Croden and his daughter escape on a Vulcan freighter bound for Vulcan, and he lies and says that Croden died in the attack. Meanwhile, Odo is very sad, still wondering where his home is. So this is an episode I think didn't age very well. It's one that I think loses its appeal and its allure now that you do know where Odo is from and who his people are. And I don't know, even this is the first episode that really focused on Odo trying to find his origins, but it was mentioned, as I pointed out, very sloppily in the premiere. And so even this one episode, after watching it, I still had the feeling that they were sort of maybe focusing on this one point too much. Now, this will come up again in season 2 before it's revealed where he's actually from. And that point especially, I think they're going overboard of teasing where he was from. And it's funny because in season 3, when the writers went to Renee Auberjonois and said that we are going to reveal Odo's origins, he was very much against that and thinking, oh no, that will ruin the character to know where his origins is from. But it's funny he felt that way, because I feel the exact opposite. I think that they stretched this on for too long, and I'm very glad they did reveal where he was from, because had they kept playing this card, I think it would have gotten... it already had gotten tiresome, and it just would have been like beating a dead horse. So I'm glad that they revealed it in season 3. I actually think they should have revealed it earlier than season 3, personally, and so it makes rewatching this episode a little bit, I don't know, feel a little bit outdated and frustrated of him being like, where am I from? Where am I from? And it's like, yeah, you're from a species of evil dictators. Surprise! But anyway, so I think this is learning about the origins of this episode. It was apparently based off a Western, a movie. I could tell it was based off of a Western. Again, we're going through Deep Space Nine again and realizing how much they were basing it off of Westerns in Season 1, because I never really thought of it as a Western. But it was based off a movie called The Naked Spur, which I suppose is probably where the movie The Naked Gun gets its title from, which I never realized before because I never heard of this movie. Or maybe it's not, because that was more of making fun of the detective noir genre, where this is a Western, but whatever, I don't know, maybe. I don't care. But anyway, the interesting thing is that they got the writer of that movie, The Naked Spur, which is about, a sheriff taking a fugitive in or whatever and escorting him to trial. So, yeah, I could see where it's based off of it. But they got the writer of that movie, Sam Rolfe, however you pronounce his name. They got him to write the script for this episode, which I thought, oh, wow, that's amazing. They got a guy who wrote a Western in the 50s to come write a Deep Space Nine episode. But then I realized he also wrote for TNG already, so he's already written for Star Trek. So I was like, okay, well, that makes it a little bit more sense. I don't know how many episodes he wrote, just one or two, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, so they told him it was based off of this Western, and they got him to write it. Now, the other interesting thing about it is that the episode that he wrote for TNG was one of, I wouldn't say favorite episodes of TNG, but one I think is highly underrated that people like to shit on, which I actually think is pretty good. The Vengeance Factor from Season 3. And apparently, and I didn't notice this, never noticed this, but the members of El Kel's crew, what are they? I was going to say Meridian. Are they Meridians? I think so. Well, whatever they are, the bad guys. His crew was supposed to be made up of gatherers from the episode Vengeance Factor, and I never know. In fact, as I was watching it today, I was just realizing how funky his crew looked, and why are they his crew? They looked like bikers or whatever. And then I read this thing saying they're supposed to be gatherers. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And it is interesting that the gatherers never appeared again in TNG or in Star Trek as far as I knew, but apparently they did appear. I just didn't know. But they said it was the script they were named as the gatherers. They never actually say it in the episode. So I don't know if you can call it official, but they're meant to be gatherers. And mind you, the gatherers have kind of, they have, they made peace with the Echelmarians and integrated back into society, so aren't really supposed to exist anymore. But it stands to reason there would be some stragglers who did not want to return to Aklamar and wanted to continue their ways, and they no longer had roaming groups of gatherers to belong to, so that they would just hire themselves off as mercenaries or join some other crews. So that makes all the sense in the world to me. This is interesting backstory to hear about. Anyway, so now it's interesting though, putting this episode in the context of the Dominion, of later Deep Space Nine, of what you'd learn. I mean, I'm noticing that for a lot of the first season Gamma Quadrant, and probably be second season Gamma Quadrant episodes as well, is you got to figure how they fit in the Dominion. And here's the thing, some people talk about, all these worlds must be a part of the Dominion, but here's the thing, and something I think they actually do make very clear in later episodes of DS9 when they introduce Dominion, is that the wormhole is not in Dominion space. That Dominion, the Dominion does have a specific territory that they control, and the wormhole is outside of that territory. And I don't think it is all that close to it. I think it would be a little bit of a distance, like relatively close, and I think they do make that clear in later episodes. I think it's kind of implied, like towards the end, like season 5, sort of a DS9, that Dominion start to just basically conquer that region of space, but they hadn't previously been there, and so all these other species and races that they're meeting, I think, exist outside of the Dominion. Now, this is the first episode in which we hear the term changeling. It's the first time that Odo is referred to as a changeling. And it's funny because I was watching some reviews of, earlier episodes like Emissary and other episodes of DS9 where they call Odo a changeling, but I was like, no, you're giving a spoiler. You're jumping ahead. He's actually just called a shapeshifter in these earlier episodes. He's not actually called a changeling. And he won't actually officially be called a changeling until season 3, I believe, when they actually meet the changelings and know that they're called the changelings. But this is the first time we hear that term introduced, and we will hear other Gamma Quadrant species also use that term in season 2. And the Gamma Quadrant species also talk about the mythology of the changelings existing on these other worlds and being persecuted, and being roaming from world to world and not being welcome. And so there's several other episodes before their introductions that continue this mythology, and I think that's and this is the first episode that does that brings it up, because Croton specifically mentions that the changelings are kind of a myth. They're kind of part of the mythology or a legend that they used to exist in the world but were persecuted and chased away because they were proud people. And they actually do integrate that into the mythology of the changelings, because the changelings say that the reason why they created the Dominion was because they were being persecuted and by the solids, and so they did it as a defense in order to control the solids, because what you can control can't hurt you, is what they said. So it was kind of the whole reason why. So I love how there's this silent mythology that they built up over time about the Dominion that's kind of in the background, and it's mainly for nitpicky nerds like myself that go back and notice these small details and put them all together and be like, oh, they were building this mythology in the Gamma Quadrant of these changelings sort of existing in people's history and mythology, but people, of course, didn't know that they became the founders because they kept that hidden, because the founders themselves were seen by some as a myth, because they keep themselves hidden and in secret, because they, as a way to protect themselves, they surround themselves by the Dominion, by the Jem'Hadar and other fighting force, and live in secret and control everything from the shadows. And that mythology actually begins in this episode when they talk about the changelings and how they were persecuted. So that's fascinating, I think, that they slowly built up this mythology on the changelings. And again, introduced the term changeling in this episode. I love that aspect of it. I think that makes this episode kind of interesting to watch, knowing that. But the whole thing about Odo being like, oh, where am I from, and blah, 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 is kind of not that interesting. Now, the main point I will get about this episode in particular, though, is that I think I talked about this in the episode The Passenger, and I feel the same way about this episode, that I feel detached from it. I feel like, I don't know why, if it's just me, but I feel like I'm just thrown into it, and because the episode begins with Croden already being on the station, and Odo's talking about the Miradorn, and I don't know who the fuck Croden is. I don't know who the fuck the Miradorn are. I don't know who the fuck this species from the Gamma Quadrant. Like, Odo, they just throw exposition very quickly at the start of the episode where Odo's talking to Quark, and they sort of just throw everything out where Odo's like, oh, what do you think of that guy over there? He was found in the Gamma Quadrants by some Klingons, and Quark's like, I don't know, he kind of keeps to himself. And I was like, what about those Miradorn that are coming by? You have a twin Miradorn that are, who are in for raiders and doing nasty things, and Quark's like, I know nothing about it. And then they jump straight into the plot of Croden showing up and holding the Miradorn at gunpoint. And I remember when I first saw this episode, I was so detached. I was so uninvested from what was going on, because I was like, who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck are these guys? What kind of fucking species are they? He's from the fucking Gamma Quadrant? Or, like, you just throw that by really quickly in a way. I don't know if I'm different, if anyone else has that feeling that I like stuff to be firmly established, and before you just throw it away in exposition. I feel very detached from giving a shit about what's going on when they do it this way. And because I was wondering, like, how much I would have liked this episode better had they actually had a scene of Croden showing up. Like, they said, oh, look, they've found him on the Klingon ship, and Cisco introduces himself, because they made such a big deal about introducing themselves to Tosk and the fucking Wadi. Like, I know they were more among the first Gamma Quadrant species, and by now there have been more that came through, but still, I still think should have had, like, Cisco or Kira or Dax or somebody there to greet him and be like, oh, welcome to the Alpha Quadrant and all this, and him be like, no, I don't really care. Like, if they established him as like, and maybe have Cisco and Dax or Odo could have been there and be like, I don't know about that guy. He seems a bit off. Something about him seems off. Like, a lot of episodes do stuff like that. They will introduce a character that way, and they'll be like, they'll set them up, like they'll set the stage. And I feel like had they done something like that, I would have been a lot more invested. Now, the way they just threw the Miradorn in, like, that would have been fine, because the main point of this episode isn't the Miradorn. It is Croden. But the fact that they throw both of them at you very quickly in exposition just makes me so detached and not give a shit about anything that's going on. Like, they could have done, honestly, they could have introduced both of them. They could have done more to introduce both of them. Show Croden show up, and then have a scene with Odo talking about the Miradorn to Kira in the security office, being like, oh, yes, these Miradorn are coming on board, and we think they're no good. Now, you could argue, oh, but they did have a scene about him talking about the Miradorn to Quark, but that scene wasn't good enough. Like, I think they needed a scene with him talking about them to Kira, and then another scene of him talking about them to Quark. I don't know if this is just me. Maybe some people think I'm holding too high of a standard for introduction, but I think I need to be properly introduced. And I do feel like most episodes do that. When most episodes have new characters and focus on them, they do a better job of properly introducing them. Like, for example, I just watched the episode Lessons over on TNG, and they didn't start the episode with some exposition being like, oh yes, Picard's in a relationship with this new commander, like in the first scene. Like, they took the time to slowly introduce, oh, who's this new commander on board, and oh, who is she? Oh, expect the unexpected, and you show see Picard meeting her for the first time, and then you slowly get them introducing. So to me, this is the equivalent of starting that episode with Picard and her already dating, which I would feel so detached and not give a shit about. So to me, that's the equivalent that they do here. And that's, you might think I'm harping on that, or it's not that big of a deal, and maybe it's just my taste. But for me, that sabotages the whole episode. Like, it's hard for me to get invested, and I hold it against the rest of the episode going forward, that they weren't properly introduced. Now, to be fair, they do a better job of introducing Cronin later on, and tell you what he's about, and they have this interesting relationship with Odo where he's constantly lying and he doesn't trust him and he thinks he's being like played, and then he is being played to an extent, but you do find out he has this backstory of being from an authoritarian society and he was unjustly persecuted and they tried to kill his whole family and he's trying to save his daughter, and so it recontextualizes this character. But the problem is, I think all of that is undermined by the fact he wasn't properly introduced. I do. I really do. I think, and if they properly introduced him as being the type of character who would have that kind of adversarial, unscrupulous relationship with Odo, then I would have sold that better. And then, so when the twist comes later at the end that, oh, actually he's being persecuted, that twist would have had more meaning, because right now, as it is, it's like, haha, this character is actually totally different than you thought. But I never knew who that character was in the first place, really, because he wasn't properly introduced. So that twist has less power and less meaning. And I was like, okay, so he's actually not unscrupulous. He's actually being persecuted. Okay, fine, whatever. I don't care, because you never got me invested in this character because you didn't properly introduce him. And I'm sorry, that's how I feel. And the Mirador, to be fair, don't really matter. They're just there as a plot device to create a threat to go after Cronin. But it's still, I stand by, it would have been nice to get some introduction to them. And I will say another thing to me that undermines this episode is the actor that got to play Cronin. He's a character actor. I've seen him around. Nothing that I really sticks in my brain or that I recognize, but I know that I know him. Like, he's been in X-Files and some other things that I've seen, and I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he's a good actor, but I think he is miscast. I don't think he's the right actor for this role. It's hard for me to describe, but I don't really see him as the sort of unscrupulous, can you trust me, can you not trust me, I'm a thief, I'm a liar, and who knows what else. He seems more like a middle-aged businessman or yuppie, or sometimes he plays the sheriff or something like that, or a working man, or so, I don't know. He seems more like a family man, which I know, given the twist, he is a family man, but still, I think the twist would work better if someone who is cast who comes off more as the roguish outlaw type, which I don't think this actor actually does. Maybe that's just me. Again, maybe some people will disagree with me, but I feel like this wasn't the right actor for this role. And I think it's an important role, and I think the episode doesn't properly introduce his role, doesn't cast it correctly, and so it kind of all falls apart. Now, that being said, I still really like the ending where it is revealed that he has a daughter. I think that was a powerful ending, and I love the fact that Odo, he's faced with the situation where he could have left Odo for dead, but he does the right thing. And he's like, don't thank me, I already regret it. And then Odo decides where he's willing to go back and face the music, and Odo decides, no, I'm going to let you escape and run away with the Vulcans. And don't thank me, I already regret it. Like, that was a nice little thing. A little back and forth. I think it would have been better if they introduced the character, but still, and it was a good seeing how Odo react to seeing what he thought he knew about this person was wrong, that he actually cared about the little girl, and seeing Odo interact with the little girl and have a heart and be like, look, I'm going to actually do the right thing here, and even though it goes against my orders, and let you go. I think that was nice. That was like a good sort of emotional thing, and it helped build Odo's character. That's something that Rene Auberjonois even said, that he really liked this episode because he thought it really built up Odo's character. The whole thing of him saying, home, where is it? I thought was kind of cheesy. But again, that's might be more of a retrospect kind of thing because I know where his home is, but I don't know. But still, I did think that was kind of a nice aspect. Now, Quark comes off very unscrupulous in this episode, and I'm noticing that, and I mentioned this in The Passenger again. I think this has a lot in common with The Passenger because they're both about like the criminal types of the Alpha Quadrant coming to the station. That seems to be one of the themes of DS9. It gets a lot of mercenaries and outlaws and thieves and bounty hunters and whatnot. That they really try to do, particularly in earlier seasons. I mean, there are a couple episodes in later seasons that do this as well, but I do feel like it was definitely something they were trying to hammer home, make the whole outlaw western thing probably of the first season. The first season portrays Quark as more of a unscrupulous outlaw. Whereas in later seasons, he'll just be he'll kind of skirt, be on the outskirts of doing illegal shit. Like he'll do like minor shit. But this episode in The Passenger, he's a bit more serious to the point where you wonder why the fuck Odo leaves him alone. Now, again, that's why they stopped doing it, because it made no sense why Odo would leave him alone if he's accessories to murder, which is what he is in both of these episodes. So that's why they went away from that and had the stuff that he was doing involved with a bit more minor and petty, which didn't make sense why Odo would leave him alone. Because it's more worth having him around for information than it would be to lock him up. But if he's going to actually be accessories to murder, then it becomes less excusable. Now, apparently Armin Shimmerman went to Michael Piller or Rick Berman, one of them, about this episode and complained. And I think it was Rick Berman. But he complained. He said that this makes my character too unlikable. This is crossing a line, having him be involved in the murder. Now, this is referring to he purposely sets a meeting with the Mirrodon and then purposely hires Croden to interrupt that meeting and steal the egg so Quark doesn't have to pay for it. And then, assuming Croden would give Quark the egg in exchange for passage back to the Gamma Quadrant. Why doesn't he just legally try to get passage from the Gamma Quadrant? I'm sure he could get, all he would do is ask Cisco. But anyway, putting that aside, why would he want to go back to the Gamma Quadrant? Why come here in the first place if he just wants to go back? Anyway, maybe the Klingons brought him back and he had to go with them because he wanted to get away from where he was, but now he wants to go back in the Gamma Quadrant, obviously to get his daughter. But anyway, it seems like it would have been better off going through official means. Regardless, Quark hires him to rob the Mirrodon and give him the egg so he doesn't have to pay for it. And in the process of this theft, one of the Mirrodons is killed. So he's basically... being involved in purposely setting up a robbery like this is more than what future Quark would do. He would never be involved in something like that. And the fact someone gets killed in that, yeah, it's kind of his fault because he set the whole thing up. But I would argue, because Armin Shimon went to Rick Berman and complained about this episode, but I would argue the episode Passenger is actually worse. And I talked about this when I did my review for The Passenger, is that he hired mercenaries to go steal a ship, and they went on the ship and fucking murdered the entire crew. Maybe not the entire crew. They said keep some of them alive unless they cause any trouble, but they definitely murdered a lot of people on that ship. So that is way worse than what he did in this episode, I think. I think Armin Shimon should have complained about anything. It should have been that episode, not this one. I remember seeing that episode and being like, holy shit, Quark's just a flat-out accessory to murder and doesn't give a fuck. Where this one is still worse than anything Quark would do in the future, but it's like he didn't intend for anyone to die. Or he didn't think anyone would die. He thought they would just show up, steal the thing, and he would rob them. Whereas in Passenger, he fucking hired mercenaries that he knew were going to hijack his ship, and he's fucking knew that they were going to kill people. He maybe didn't want to think about it, but he fucking knew. And so that, I think, is actually much, much worse. But yeah, it's interesting seeing him in Rom and the way Rom's portrayed. Now, here's the thing. You can make an argument that Rom is just stupid about certain things in these episodes, and he's actually maybe behind the scenes a technical genius. He's just trying to be a businessman in order to be good Ferengi, and he's no good at that, so that makes him appear stupid. But let's be clear. That is all just headcanon. The real answer is that the writers hadn't developed Rom's character yet. And honestly, when they were writing him in episodes like this, they were writing him as an idiot. That was their intention. That was what they thought of this character. I don't think they ever had plans to truly develop him, and they never thought they would. So they're like, let's just have Quark's brother be a complete and total moron. And that's how they wrote him. And later episodes, later seasons, they're like, well, Rom should be more than just a simple moron. Let's say he's an engineering genius. So they retconned it, and so that's how they wrote him. It was a retcon. Not saying it was a bad one, because there can be good retcons. But it is a retcon nonetheless. Whether it's bad or good, I'll leave that up to you. I think it's fine. I don't have an issue with it, but it just is one. Just be perfectly honest about that. Just like Nog is a retcon too. I know people try to headcanon in their way and say, oh, he was always meant to join Starfleet, but no, he wasn't. That's a fucking retcon. But that's another story. And that one I actually think is worse than the Rom one. But, again, story for another time. Anyway, so another thing I have to talk about with this episode, another big first for the series, is that this is the first time we hear the name Morn on the show. Yes, Morn, everyone's favorite bar. Was it bar something? Barstool? I don't know. Anyway, guy at the bar. Everyone's favorite guy at the bar. I didn't realize this until I looked it up, but apparently this is the first time Morn is mentioned by name, where Odo tells Quark that Morn mentioned that Quark was talking a lot to Croton, and then Quark turns to Morn and says, well, Morn should keep his big mouth shut. So he looks specifically at him, making it clear that this is who Morn is. And plus, saying he should keep his big mouth shut is kind of also the beginning of the running joke that Morn talks a lot off screen, even though we never hear him say a peep on screen. In fact, a couple episodes ago, or was it last episode, the Nagus would be the only time we heard Morn make any noise when he was laughing. But then there will become a running joke about how he's constantly talks all the time, yet we never actually see him talk. And it's not really implied here, but it's kind of the beginning of it, where he should keep his big mouth shut like he talks too much. Anyway, love Morn. Always gotta talk about Morn. So let me thank all the Patreon supporters. Patreon? I don't know why I said it like. All the Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I would like to give a big special thanks to Antarius and Brandon Neilhouse. Thank you both so very, very much for your support. I would also like to give a shout out to Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kerry091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Vortex, more like poor sex, which is the worst kind of sex, but it's still kind of nice. I don't remember this episode much. I vaguely remember the stuff about Odo wanting to learn about changelings from a guy, but the guy is dangerous or something. The episode is mildly satisfying, but not terribly memorable. Like poor sex. And then Stephen Kennedy responds saying, maybe their sex was interrupted by a whirlwind. Get it? A vortex? See what you did there. Anyway, I do kind of like the poor sex pun. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, this is Randy Oglesby's, can't really pronounce that, Oglesby, something like that. Anyway, this is Randy Oglesby's second appearance in the Trek franchise. He was in Loud as a Whisper on TNG, and he would make another appearance on Deep Space Nine as Solarian, I don't know. And The Darkness and the Light. He would play another character on Enterprise before he appears again as Dagra. How many times should Quark be in prison? But lucky for him, at the end of the episode, nothing happens. It seems Quark has 9 chances, but he doesn't look like a cat to me. Odo has a nice moment letting Croden go to be with his daughter when a Vulcan ship arrives. So my rating is 7. Odo should have used that key that Croden gave him to open the door in the episode The Search, out of 10. That's actually a really good point. Although Odo was trying to use his own shape-shifting abilities to open the door, but he couldn't quite get it to work, so I don't know if the key would have worked any better, because I feel like that key was specifically designed for that one lock. I don't know if it was like a multi-purpose changeling key. Maybe it was. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's see. Dagra. That's Dagra. I did not notice him, honestly, until you pointed it out. Like, I recognized him when I watched Loud as a Whisper. I was like, oh, clearly that's Dagra. But this episode, I didn't recognize him. It was all that heavy makeup. But once you pointed it out, I was like, oh, yeah, that is Dagra. Yeah. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, the first half of this episode was a little bit boring, especially as we now know all about Odo's origins. Certainly it was much more engaging back in the days. But the second half was really good and quite exciting. I liked that the 2 plot twists of finding the daughter and of Odo letting go of the prisoner. I am a security chief, not a combat pilot. So why isn't Odo accompanied by a good pilot, especially since it was clear a lot of trouble was on the way was possible? And why is Croden able to pilot the ship? Are the controls of a Federation vessel so intuitive? This episode shows the bad decision by hold on. This episode shows the bad decision by the Federation not to give DS9 a stronger ship from the beginning. In addition to that, the station is so badly equipped they don't have the means to stop the small Meridian ship. Again, this episode shows Quark more unscrupulous than later seasons. My rating is a 7 out of 10. No, I totally agree. I totally agree with you that about I was thinking the same thing about this station, how they didn't really equip it well enough. This is something I complained about in Emissary, but it comes up here again where there's this dinky mirrored-on ship that the station's able to do nothing about as it goes after a runabout, which it can take down easily. You know, if this was post-season 3, all they'd had to do is get the Defiant out there and be like, what you gonna do, motherfucker? Go after the runabout, you piece of shit. I'll blow you to smithereens. But even if they didn't have the Defiant, they should have something better than the dinky runabouts, or the station itself should be more equipped to deal with it. I think it makes no goddamn sense. Personally. I think it is a big deal. And so you're saying that the first half was kind of boring, but it got more interesting in the second half. I think that's because they didn't give these characters a proper introduction, personally. But I know I already talked about that. Anyway, yes, Quark is definitely more unscrupulous in this season. But yeah, they will address that. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, back in the day, I considered it an uninspiring episode. Of course, Odo was not going to learn more about his people or his origin. This guy was stringing him along, and after we do know in Season 3, it makes this episode even more forgettable. It really seems at this point they had no clue yet what the Gamma Quadrant was about, and certainly no sign of an expansive regime that starts with a D. It would be interesting to know what happens to this guy and his daughter out in Vulcan, but otherwise, very meh episode. 3, take us out of your precious vortex, out of 10. No, they definitely didn't know anything about a big regime that starts with a D. But to be fair, they did know about the big regime that starts with a D in Season 2. And even though they didn't show them, they were just teasing them over and over again all season, and finally showed them at the end of Season 2. It was made clear by the writers that they came up with the idea for the D. They want that D. Anyway, they came up with the idea for the Dominion during Season 2, so they knew about it during most of Season 2, but they were building the groundwork and didn't introduce them till the end of Season 2. But in this season, yeah, they clearly had no idea, and they clearly had no idea who Odo's people were. And I agree, like, this episode was kind of, even before you knew who Odo's people were, this episode was already uninteresting because you knew that they were just stringing him along. So it was kind of like, yeah, of course he's not going to find out where he's from, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes even less important or less interesting once you do know where he's from. I agree. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I'm watching Birthright Part 1 and I'm drinking. But it seems to me that Alexander Siddig's acting was not too bad. Maybe because he wasn't trying to hit on Dax or Kira or be an absolute earthhole. I may not watch Part 2, aka the Klingon Academy. And Stephen Kennedy has another comment saying, I may be drunk watching Birthright. Maybe the director, Rinrich Colby, got a good performance out of Alexander Siddig, like Olivia Stone got a great performance out of Tom Cruise from the movie Born on 4th of July. By the way, I don't like Tom Cruise in movies, as most of his movies turn into the Tom Cruise show. I do like the Mission Impossible movies, except for Part 2, which was written by Ronald D. Moore and Brennan Braga. What? Mission Impossible. What? Mission Impossible 2 was written by Ronald D. Moore and Brennan Braga? That movie was a piece of shit. And they're good writers. How can... that's surprising. I never knew that. But anyway, see how I was able to keep the comment on track? LOL. P.S. I won't comment again, but in going to watch episode 5 of season 3 of Picard for research on the person I don't like, as I have started my comment on preemptive strike. P.S. Part 2, I'm glad Ronald D. Moore didn't write Birthright Part 1 of 2, as it would have been a dishonor. He didn't write Birthright Part 2 either. That was Rene Echeverria. Whatever his name is. Anyway, yes, kind of irrelevant comments. So I can tell you a little drunk, but that's all good. All kind of comments are welcome here on Enchantment of Eternity. But as for Tom Cruise, well, my mind's still blown that Brennan Braga and Ronald D. Moore wrote Mission Impossible 2. I never knew that. So I like the Mission Impossible movies as well, but not Mission Impossible 2. That's a piece of shit. And that's funny that the only bad movie out of the franchise is the one that they wrote. I'm kind of amazed by that. I didn't know they wrote any movies other than Star Trek. But anyway, maybe their career ended after that, or their movie career. They went on to do TV shows, but maybe their movie career ended because that movie sucked so much. But anyway, I know that Mission Impossible 3 was written by, was that J.J. Abrams? No, he directed it. Anyway, sorry. So I like the Mission Impossible movies, except for 2. 3 was kind of boring. So 1 was amazing. 2 sucked. 3 was kind of boring. 4 was even more boring and overrated. 5 was really, really good. And 6 was probably one of the best action movies of all fucking time. 7 was a little bit of a letdown. After it has a follow-up to 6. Still good, but nowhere near as good as 6. But anyway, I think Tom Cruise, he's good in other movies as well. Like, what's that one? The time loop one, Edge of Tomorrow. And yes, it's called Edge of Tomorrow, not Live, Die, Repeat. I can't believe everyone thinks Live, Die, Repeat is a better title. It's such a stupid title. It sounds so dumb. Live, Die, Repeat. Edge of Tomorrow sounds cool. Fuck, everyone's wrong on that one. But now you have me going off on all these tangents as well. It has nothing to do with this episode. But Tom Cruise is a good actor. I agree. He's maybe not a good person. He's a bit arrogant in real life. But no, he's actually, I've heard he can be a really nice guy, though, on set. But no, he can definitely be. He's not a bad actor. He's a good actor. He can just be a bit more. You are right, though, that a lot of times Tom Cruise movies that he's in end up being Tom Cruise movies instead of, movies. They end up being all about him. So that is the pitfall. But he is a good actor. It's funny, I used to hate Tom Cruise, and now I'm okay with him, and everyone else seems to hate him now. But anyway, back to Trek. Alexander Siddig was decent in season 1. He wasn't always a terrible actor. It was mainly just his performance in The Passenger, which fucking sucked. I would say I think you talked about in earlier comments that he was a bad actor, so maybe that's why you're commenting now, saying, oh, actually, he's pretty good. He's decent. He was decent in season 1, but he definitely got better in later seasons. For sure. Anyway. So next comment is from Ricky, who says, This episode was actually pretty good, as this is when they started to flesh out Odo's character and his origins. Of course, this wouldn't be explored until Season 3, but this was a good beginning for Odo. Also, I kind of like that Odo helped the guy to rescue his daughter, and that he let them go to live happily ever after. Although at times I find it a plot contrivance that he didn't mention his daughter from the very beginning, but like I said, a decent episode, so my rating is a 7 out of 10. I actually buy that he didn't mention his daughter. I talk about there's plot contrivances sometimes when someone doesn't mention something, and everything would have worked out better had they simply mentioned it, and there was no reason why they wouldn't simply mention it to begin with. But in this case, they portrayed him as kind of an unscrupulous kind of guy who was in a lot of law breaking and stuff like that. And so had he mentioned his daughter to Odo, Odo probably wouldn't trust him. Or would think that he's lying. And also I get it's in his character to not be honest, to not trust people, especially strangers, security officers, considering the security officers on his world is the ones that killed his family. So I would get that he would not be trusting, and instead would try to play and manipulate, would try to play him, would try to manipulate him to kind of get to what he wants, but eventually it would be withered down to eventually revealing the truth. So I actually do buy it. In this episode in particular, I think the way that they wrote it earned it, but that is just my humble opinion on that particular case. Thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Vortex out of 10, it's going to be a 6. Good. I was thinking about giving this episode a 7, but you know what? The fact that I'm really caught up in the fact that they didn't give the characters a proper introduction. And I do think that holds the episode down, and it holds it back. And the fact that it does the whole Odo, where's my home thing, is also kind of a drawback, especially knowing where his home is eventually. And the Miradorn are kind of just thrown in there for a plot device in order to create a threat. And they do make Quark a bit too unscrupulous in this episode. But I do kind of like the chemistry between Odo and Croden, even though Croden was miscast and they should have gotten a more fitting actor to play him. I still think it was written well, at least that aspect of it, not the introduction. But the sort of back and forth between Croden and Odo worked, and of course the reveal that Croden actually had a little girl and see Odo doing the right thing was actually kind of touching. So I'll go as far as a 6, but no further. This far, no further. Anyway, that is it for my review of Vortex. So coming up next on my channel, Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for The Chase for Patreon supporters, and on Monday back here on my main channel for another public review for the DS9 episode of Battle Lines. Battle Lines. I don't know why I said it like that. Battle Lines. I put the emphasis in the wrong place. Anyway, Wednesday, back over on Patreon for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Frame of Mind, and then on Thursday back here for another DS9 review with The Storyteller. So that's what's coming up next on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.